Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore in your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my marvelous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
Dark, cynical laughter.
Indeed.
I'm just an Elcor now.
I mean, to be fair, I had a lot of fun playing an Elcor, so yeah. I could see why you'd want to be one.
Being ridiculously strong and having the ability to just say how you feel and not have to explain, you don't sound happy. Well, I am. I'm incredibly happy. Just accept it.
Yep. Emoting is hard, folks. Emoting is hard.
My personal favorite is still insincere laughter. Oh, no, it's a great day.
Well, we could talk about Elcors all day long, and as a matter of fact, one day we might. You never know what the future will bring for Lore Watch, as we have a few special episodes planned in the near future here. But right now, we're going to be answering questions from you, our wonderful listeners. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in. You can hit us up on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel set aside specifically for Q and Podcast Questions. You never would have imagined from the name, I'm sure. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you can hit us up on the Discord channel, Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel. It's specifically set aside for our Patreon subscribers as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. And if Discord isn't your thing, you can also send us an email to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. All we ask is that in each case, you specify what show your question is for, any special pronunciations of your name, and any other pertinent information that you feel like sharing, because I enjoy reading your connections. They make me smile. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the first one, which is from Neon Penguin. Neon Penguin asks, can you do a timeline breakdown of the Arathi people? It's very confusing how old they are with established lore. Matt, would you like to wax poetic about the Empire of Arathi, otherwise known as Arathor?
The thing is that we have two different entities here, and we only know about one of them. Yep. The original Arathi Empire, formed by Arathor, I want to say it was like 1,000 years ago. I believe that's when the Troll Wars happened, and the Arathor, the various human tribes throughout the areas of Lordaeron, Arathi, and other regions of the continent.
Yeah, I think it was between 2800 and 1200 BDP or something like that.
Yeah, it was a while ago. But it was, so in actual human history of the world we actually live on, this is an extremely long amount of time. But obviously on Azeroth, where people's memories go back tens of thousands of years, humans are relative upstarts. Part of the problem is that before the Arathi people existed, there were a group of Vrykul who came south with Tyr, who is, you guys remember Tyr from Dragonflight. That guy went south with a whole bunch of these Vrykul who had Curse of Flesh children with them, their own children, who were not growing up to be Vrykul anymore. They were, in fact, growing smaller and weaker into what we call humans. Much like if you go back to Draenor and you look at orcs, they're relatively puny compared to their ancestors. In fact, I've often said...
They are the gnomes of Draenor, indeed.
Yeah. I've often said that orcs are the gnomes of Draenor, the smallest, smartest descendants of the Titanforged. Humans are similarly much smaller than their antecedents, than the Vrykul peoples. So those Vrykul, when they died out, because none of their children were turning into Vrykul, they were turning into humans. So when those few that were remaining died out, they left behind like a kind of confusing history for their children and grandchildren to try and piece out. In addition, they left behind relics that to humans looked like ridiculous, massive, Final Fantasy weapons, but to the Vrykul, they were perfectly serviceable, dirks and knives and so forth. Like a Vrykul knife could be a great sword for a human very easily. And one of the other things about that period of time is that after they were basically left without any real guidance. The other Titan Watchers who came down with Tyr had locked themselves in Uldaman. They ran away from the Chithraxes that were following, and they were told to do this. They were told, you've got the Discs of Nerganon, get out of here, find a place you can secure and keep those safe, And Tyr stood and fought the Chithraxi, killing one, kinda, and wounding the other so badly that he went off and collapsed in what's now Stranglethorn. And that was Kithix. The one that didn't was Zakajaz. He's the one that actually died. Again, sort of. And Zakajaz was the one they left behind to die. He was actually in the Tier of Tomb, which is where Tyr himself was also buried. His friends were told, the ones that had stayed to fight with him, who were all human at this point, had been told to lock him in here and he'd, just guard over the site. Don't make sure nobody goes in. And so the ancestors of modern Lordaeron, their people, including the Lordain himself, the guy that Lordaeron's named after, all lived in that area. And basically that was what they did. They were like, their society was built around protecting this area. Meanwhile, all the other humans who had come down basically scattered across whatever parts of the Eastern Kingdoms they could settle. And at the time, keep in mind that the Sundering happened right about like within generations of this moment. So they went from living on the far, far eastern coast of the enormous continent of Kalimdor to living sort of in the middle of a much smaller kingdom that eventually became known as the Eastern Kingdoms. Originally, it was actually called Azeroth. The word Azeroth is of Arathi / Vrykul descent, and it was the name that was being used for just this area because they didn't realize there was anything else to go name it after. They didn't realize that Azeroth was a big planet. They just thought it was this continent they lived on. Thousands of years passed. The trolls and high elves, who had also settled in the Eastern Kingdoms, basically ignored the Arathi as more trouble than they were worth. Like, sure, you could kill them all. It would be a lot of work, and they're crazy. We could do it, but if we do it, whichever group decided to go spend time killing off all the humans is going to be incredibly vulnerable to their enemies. Like, if the trolls tried to do it, the elves were going to like stomp on them because they would have turned their backs on them. And the elves felt much the same way. Like, they didn't have any fondness for humanity, but they were like, well, we certainly don't want to have to try and fight them and the trolls at the same time. Eventually, however, the trolls got so nasty to both groups that the high elves finally were like, look, okay, the humans are obviously primitive monsters, but they're not trying to eat us, whereas the trolls actually are killing and eating us. So what's about we try and outflank them? The elves basically sent some emissaries to the largest and strongest of the human tribes at the time, which was led by a man named Arathor. Arathor was a lot smarter than the elves had given him credit for, and in fact had united multiple tribes already in a defensive alliance against the trolls. So when they came down, they were like, hey, why don't we make a deal? Arathor's like, sure. I've got like a couple hundred people here. I want you to make them into those magician types you've got. And also swear that if anyone of my bloodline ever comes to you for help, you'll immediately help them, and then we'll be square. Okay? Does that sound good to you? The high elves were like, at first, do we really want to teach these people magic? But then another high elf was like, well, geez, they barely live 80 years. How are they? They're not going to achieve mastery. Like, what are they going to like become masters in 10 years? Are you kidding me? So yeah, all right, that makes sense. Sure. So they made the deal, taught humans magic. Humans are ridiculously good at learning magic, much faster than elves. The elves were like, wait a minute, they basically are masters now. We've just trained 100 masters. Oh boy, that's not good. So that's the start of the Arathi Empire, the original one. Between that moment and today, a lot of stuff happened. One of the things that happened was that when Arathor died, his direct heirs, his children, they weren't alive anymore. Arathor actually outlived his immediate family. Now, they had children, and as a result, there were a lot of grandchildren of Arathor around. But none of them had a direct claim on the throne the way he did or his children would have. Partially because his lieutenants, the ancestor of the Trollbane line and Lordain, both had enormous power in their individual areas. Like, Lordain was basically the law in what is now Lordaeron. So whilst Arathor's children could oppress the claim, it's not like the people of Lordaeron were going to listen to them over Lordain. Mm-hmm. They listened to Arathor because Arathor directly listened to Lordain. But now that, I mean, the other way around, Lordain directly listened to Azeroth. But now, with Lordain still being around, they weren't going to like turn to the children of Arathor. Same thing happened in what is now Arathi. The Arathi people, sure, they loved Arathor, and they had no problem with his grandchildren, but the Trollbanes were right there, already basically ruling. And so why should we, like, we don't even want to necessarily be in a nation with the people from Lordaeron. Like, we did it for Arathor, but now why should we bother? And so rather than fight a war over this, the descendants of, and this is all we know right now, but I'm going to cue in on what I think might have happened after. We know that the descendants of Arathor himself were like, look, we don't want to fight over this either.
Well, maybe not all of them, because some of them may have actually like been folded in, but a good chunk of them.
Yeah. The ones that we know about currently, and I said I'll get more into it. Most of them were like, okay, we don't want to fight this either. So how's about, like, rather than the Empire tear itself apart in civil war, why don't we explore? Like, give us a bunch of people who don't necessarily want to live under the Trollbanes, and we'll go south and we'll see what we can find.
And it wasn't just them either, right? Like,
no, there's other people we know, other people from this group. Some founded Dalaran, which was basically, some of the mages were like, look, we lived with elves for a while. We kind of like it better. No offense, you guys, the stone floors and bear skins and eating food with our hands, that's great. But we kind of want to go do more elvy stuff and keep learning magic. So they went and made Dalaran. I am simplifying the heck out of this, but that's the origin of Dalaran. Partially, it's an attempt by the High Elves to keep some kind of control on human wizardry, because humans are really good at it, and they're like, ooh, we gotta make sure they at least listen to us and don't do really bad things, like, summon an elemental demon spirit into their body and then spend decades with it inside of them. Meryl, we're looking at you, Meryl Fellstorm. But so, as Joe pointed out, you've got they sent out these expeditions. One expedition eventually found Kultiris. And in fact, the Kultiris expedition was off the back of an expedition that found Gilneas and settled Gilneas. The people of Kultiris and the people of Gilneas are actually more closely related, because the people who went to Kultiris came from Gilneas initially, which was itself people who didn't want to live in Lordaeron and follow Lordain and his family around. So that happened.
Essentially, this collapse is leading, if you haven't figured it out so far, and I just want to throw this in there, this is essentially the Seven Kingdoms, right? This is essentially this is the origin story of the Seven Kingdoms, which all hail back to that Arathor Empire. Rather
than, fight over the Empire's throne and decide who gets to be in charge of what, they all kind of picked an area and said, yeah, we're just this is our kingdom, and
I like this rock. This is my rock now.
Yeah. So you ended up with like Lordaeron was basically the original followers of Lordain, his people. They just went back to their homeland and did what they were doing there. Gilneas and Kultiris are basically offshoots of people who didn't want to live in Lordaeron or people who didn't want to live in Arathor, which is now Arathi, heading in that direction. So that's up to 4. 5 is Dalaran. Dalaran was basically, yeah, okay, we're going to go do magic instead. The 6th was, I can never remember the proper name. And then if someone reminds me, and I'm like, yes, of course. But basically,
Stormguard?
In between, no. The place that's in between all of them. You know the one I'm talking about. We just can't remember the name. Deathwing pretended to be the heir of this place.
Well, there's the Seven Kingdoms as listed are Stromgarde, Kultiris, Lordaeron, Stormwind, Gilneas, Dalaran, and Alterac.
Alterac is what I'm trying to tell you.
Yes.
Yeah, the Alterac area, basically the family that ruled Alterac were kind of like, they realized, hey, we have a really good position here. We're between practically everybody. Most of these kingdoms, if they want to have trade or commerce, they have to go through us, or they have to go through the sea. So they made themselves a pretty good holding, and they held on for a long time. But they were always kind of like aloof from the other kingdoms. The final kingdom, as Joe already just mentioned, was Stormwind. And Stormwind is interesting because Stormwind was founded by a group of people who left Stromgarde because they didn't want to live under the Trollbanes. They were Arathor loyalists, and they were led by a direct descendant of Arathor, one of his grandchildren. And they, like I said, headed down to Stormwind, essentially stole that area from the trolls there was troll kingdoms all in the area around it, but they couldn't hold out against the humans and got pushed further south, which led to them finding a magic knife, and that'll come up later. The magic knife is important, as is the monster that the magic knife was awakened with. But anyway, whilst that was all happening, they went and founded Stormwind, and Stormwind was the most isolated and frontier of these kingdoms that we were aware of at the time. But now, in the War Within, the Arathi were meeting now. It seems like at least one group were like, we're going to go further.
Yeah, there seems to be at least indications in the game. I'll talk about just a little bit here, if you don't mind, where while the Seven Kingdoms were essentially being founded at an unspecified time, because even in the literature and game, even in the stuff that you can read and find while you're bumping around Hallowfell, it doesn't really specify an exact date yet. I'm sure we'll get there at some point. But it was humans from Arathor and high elves from Quel'Thalas were just like, let's keep going. And so they left the Eastern Kingdoms and traveled across the sea to an unspecified landmass where they founded a new Arathi empire. So,
yeah, and it's quite possible that landmass is well beyond the entire map, because they talk several times about having to fly through the ocean that is completely impassable. And we also have mentioned that same ocean in Dragonflight when talking about some of the Earthen and other people who were involved in rebelling against Odin and the other Titan Watchers lived in this general direction.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be someplace nearish to Khazagul, but it might also be on the other side entirely, because when they're coming back, when they get the message from their emperor and are coming back, they run into this massive nightmare, impassable storm, and they have to basically blink teleport their way underground into Khazalgar.
Well, they don't blink teleport. Belladar does.
Yeah, but that's still we don't understand why Belladar did that or how it did that.
Sure.
Did they pray? If Belladar was like, "I am the light," sure, thwomp. We don't know.
We've speculated on that, I think, in a past episode a little bit. So, but the interesting thing about that, I think, too, is what we also find out about how isolated the Empire of Arathor is, because despite the fact that they moved and they deposited themselves in this and founded this kingdom an unspecified amount of time ago, we don't know how big it is. We don't know what the population is like, except for the fact that they are a culmination of human and elves living together for a long period of time, interbreeding, where essentially the Arathi folks are a whole new race unto themselves. Also, they're so far away from everything else that was happening in the world that as you're reading through like the books that you find, like they don't understand what dragons are anymore. Dragons are legendary beasts that like burn villages and grant wishes, kind of like the typical medieval stuff. They also have stories of gigantic monsters that they call them kaijus, which I'm sure is developer like hat tip, but I actually think that's really hilarious. And as you would expect, because they're so isolated, their language structure, while similar to its roots, has its own sort of idioms and slang that are very specific to that kingdom, to that empire. Like there's a reference to a magic shield from the old world is called an Aegis wall, or they use words like ash or firecrackers or flames be praised, which fits into their identity. But you could see where there's like those influence of the arcane as well as the human and this devotion to the light.
There's also an interesting elven track down that you can do real easily. The name Belladar.
Mm-hmm.
Belladar, they keep calling it their star. Dar means star in Kaldori.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically Darnassus, city of the stars. The Kaldorai, the door is from stars. So Dar means star. And that's held on in the language of the Arathi. The language of the Arathi has certain high elven aspects to it.
Yes.
And it has certain human aspects to it. The high elven stuff comes through in these compound words like Belladar. And there are others.
Which you want to just kind of highlight here as well. We just saw another place that had a very similar name in the last expansion, we basically help found Belemeth, or Arm of the Goddess in Darnassian. So I think that's also very interesting.
Might very well mean goddess's star or star.
Or arms of the stars.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting too. Not to get too far into the whole weeds as to the fact that they're a new mix of peoples, but there's an actual point when you're talking to, well, it's not even you talking, it's Anduin Rin is talking to, I want to say Faralar? What is her name? The Lothar?
Farron,
thank you. Farron, he's talking to Farron Lothar. And he makes the point that Anduin Lothar, who he is named after, was this enormous hero of Stormwind. And she's like, wow, I didn't know anybody of our bloodline was, I was related to anybody in the old world. There's a separation between the bloodline. I feel the word Lothar must come from an old Arathi word that means from Arathor.
That would make sense. Lo being from, Thar being the inference of the Empire.
The shortened name of Arathor. It's quite possible that Arathor eventually got shortened down to Athor, and then Loa Thor, which then gets shortened to Lothar. That happens in our words all the time. There's lots of words where, goodbye, shortened down from God be with you, and so forth. There's words that just get mushed down because as you say them and say them and say them, you start dropping letters. It's a thing that happens in words. But that means that it's very possible that the Arathi Empire that we've now run into members of in Khazilgar might have been founded by the same exact expedition that made Stormwind. It's entirely possible that those people either decided, while you guys are going to go south, we're going to go west. It's possible that some of the boats got blown away in a storm. There's a lot of possibilities, but it seems likely that of the people that Arathor had trained to be mages, it's quite possible at least a few of them were his children. I mean, if he had children that were capable of learning magic, he'd have wanted them to get to learn it. And it's also interesting, if you've played a warrior in Legion, you know that one of the weapons is Stromkar.
Mm-hmm.
Stromkar is a Vrykul weapon that has elven magics overlaid onto it. What if the reason that weapon had elven magics wasn't because the elves just liked Arathor so much, but because he actually had elven or half-elven children in his family? We don't know anything about Arathor's life other than the tiniest little vignettes. How did they seal the deal between him and Quel'Thalas? A lot of times countries seal the deal with marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Did he marry some elven princess? Did Anastarian or his father have some daughter that married Arathor? For that matter, we've never heard about Arathor's family. We don't know what his children were. For all we know, the Great Kairos is one of Arathor's children. We don't know anything. There's a lot of possibilities. I'm not saying that he is. I'm saying he might be. Look at how revered he is. If he were a member of that bloodline, that might explain it. It would also explain why he's so forgiving to Farron.
Mm-hmm.
He lets Farron get away with a lot of stuff. He's the head of the Lamplighter Order, not her. But he lets her pretty much do whatever she wants. So there's possibilities in there. For all we know, the Arathi Emperor is an elected position. We really have no idea. We do know that whoever the Emperor is, they have visions.
Mm-hmm.
And the visions seem to be of the light, and it's quite kind of telling that they seem to be about Beladar. You almost had me calling it Belemeth there. So yeah, anything else you want to say, Joe?
No, I think that's it. We're at a point, and we've talked about this before. I'm actually really interested to see what we get revealed from further content and further updates in the expansion, because the Arathi story is not complete. When you finish the zone, when you do everything, you're just scratching the surface. And there's definitely a big setup for more revelations to come. So I'm looking forward to seeing what gets revealed, because I do think it's absolutely fascinating. I also think it's really interesting because Matt and I think, talked about not specifically the Arathi, but this type of thing, I think years ago at this point, where we received a question from one of our listeners that was, why don't we see more races interbreeding? And we talked about it, and we talked about breaking down what those would possibly look like and what they could possibly be, and genetic compatibility or whatever the case was. And we're finally starting to see that. And in a world that's been around forever, right? Like these are long empires. These are thousands and thousands of years. In the case of humans and elves, we're talking like the Arathi Empire and the elves, we're talking at least, 3,000 years at this point? 4,000 years? Yeah. Like, so 4,000 and change of them coexisting. So, yeah, that's a long time, and you would expect to see more genetic diversity, I guess would be the best way to put it, as opposed to, a goblin is always a goblin is always a goblin. So I'm happy to see that. I'm happy to see more of it, because before this, the last time we had seen it was the children of Ronan, and I always mess it up. Verisa. Yep.
Yeah, I always want to say Valeria too.
Always, every single time. And then Valeria's child as well, because, again, those are the only examples we've seen. So we knew it was possible. We just hadn't seen it more. And it was just one of those things. But hopefully that answers your question. That is a rough timeline, or at least what we can offer, with a giant black hole in the middle that will hopefully be filled in as we move through this expansion.
Yep.
All right. This one comes from our friend Red Bandit, who is a troll hunter from Skywall. Is there a canonical faction that beat each dungeon and raid? Like RFC is obviously Horde and Stockades is Alliance. What about the others? So, fun fact, Chronicle 4 actually released just a couple months ago at this point. It released in the middle of July, and it kind of snuck under the radar. We haven't really talked about it yet. That'll be a future thing. Life happens. Matt and I have been a little busy with the whole out of work, outside of this type of thing. But it does actually give you a timeline inside of it up through Shadowlands. So I'm going to kind of give a brief rundown real quick, because, well, it's there. You should read it, but I think it's actually pretty interesting. So, classic or vanilla, the Alliance canonically were the victors of the Stockades, Dead Mines, Gnomragon, Blackrock Depths, Sunken Temple, the Temple of AQ, and Naxxramas, which I think that's... The Temple and the Naxxramas ones are actually really interesting. That's definitely some interesting, I want to say, decision-making. But then Naxxramas gets moved, and we'll come back to that later. The Horde get Ragefire Chasm, Shadowfang Keep, Razorfern Crawl, Razorfern Downs. The Scarlet Monastery was taken care of by the Horde. Moradon, Dire Maul, Blackrock Spire were all taken care of by the Horde. Blackwing Lair, Wailing Caverns, Zul'Gurub, and the Ruins of AQ were all taken care of by the Horde. The ones that are fall into the both or unknown category are Scholomance, Stratholme, Uldaman, Zul'Farrak, or Molten Core. Nobody really claims victory over those, and it was sort of a large enough thing that multiple people were probably involved. Like, you could have had two full armies fighting inside of the Molten Core at the same time, and they possibly would never have even connected with each other. That's how vast that place is. In Burning Crusade, the Alliance were responsible for Serpent Shrine Cavern, the Sunwell Plateau, and Onyxia's Lair, which makes sense with where things are located. The Horde were in charge of taking care of Shattered Halls, Magtheridon's Lair, the Eye, Zulaman, and Magister's Terrace, with both coming together to take down the Black Temple. In Wrath of the Lich King, Alliance were responsible for the Halls of Stone, and the Horde were responsible for the Halls of Lightning, sort of splitting responsibility there, with both working together for taking out the Naxxramas, the Eye of Eternity, Ulduar, Trial of Crusader, and Icecrown Citadel. Cataclysm has a little bit of a split here, but you can start to see a trend going until we start getting back into the war between the factions. Things have started to cool down a little bit. So in Cataclysm, the Alliance is responsible for Grim Batal and Well of Eternity, and the Horde take care of the Bastion of Twilight and End Time, with both coming together for Throne of the Four Winds, going back to Zulaman and Zul'Gurub, breaching the Firelands, and taking out the Dragon Soul. Mist of Pandaria, the Alliance take care of the Terrace of Endless Spring, the Horde take care of the Heart of Fear, which makes sense. If the Horde are taking out the Heart of Fear, it's kind of where probably Garrosh got a lot of his ideas about, this whole Shah corruption thing, because that place was ripe with it. With both taking out the Temple of the Jade Serpent, the Storm Stout Brewery, the Shadowpan Monastery, the Mogoshan Palace, and both participating in the Siege of Orgrimmar. Again, if you look at it, it's one of those things where it's like, these are large places. They're large enough that multiple groups could be going in and taking care of it at the same time. Makes sense. Warlords of Draenor, the Alliance take care of the Upper Blackrock Spire, Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, the Grimrail Depot, the Everbloom, and High Mall, with the Horde taking out the Iron Docks and the Blackrock Foundry. I found that one a little bit interesting, that the Alliance in the Warlords of Draenor technically did more than the Horde did. Because while Blackrock Foundry was important, Iron Docks into the Blackrock Foundry is kind of like one engagement, where the Alliance, while they did have an invested interest in definitely Grimrail Depot and the Everbloom, since the Everbloom was breaching into the land outside of Stormwind, and Upper Blackrock Spire, because it's literally right there. I was surprised to see the Shadow Moon Burial Grounds were not more cross-faction. But both were responsible for Akadun, Skyreach, and the Hellfire Citadel. Legion, Alliance were only responsible for the Court of Stars, which is fascinating. The Horde took out Neltharion's Lair and the Archway, with both taking care of literally everything else that was there. Battle for Azeroth, we get a little more diversification there, with the Shrine of the Storms, Waycrest Manor, Siege of Borealis, and Tol Dagor going to the Alliance, which makes sense. Those are all called Tyrant adjacent. With the Horde taking care of this Temple of Sethralis, the Tal Dazar, King's Rest, and the Crucible of Storms. Although the Crucible of Storms could have been both, based off its geographic location, but giving it to the Horde, I think, was just trying to keep things even. With both coming together for Mechagon Uldir, the Battle for Dazar'alor, as is present if you do that encounter, the Eternal Palace, and Ny'alotha, the Waking City. And then in Shadowlands, everybody came together and did everything. So that is the short, quick version of who did what up into Shadowlands. I believe in Dragonflight, because this was written well before Dragonflight concluded, I don't know that there will be much of a distinction, as we were all coming together, and it's sort of our unified forces that were going into these places, taking them out, but we'll see in a future updated list. Matt, did you have anything to add to any of those, or any color commentary you would like to give?
Not really. I mean, I'll be upfront in not caring who beat what. It feels kind of like, it feels to me, honestly, it feels like to me like when dinosaur fans are like, which dinosaur would win? It's like, I neither know nor care, man. But some of that makes sense. I think it's really kind of interesting that the Horde as an organization doesn't feel like it has any kind of cohesive idea of what it should be doing, and these dungeons reflect that. Like, oh, we're here. Why are you in this one? Oh, okay, whatever. Just sometimes it feels like the Horde just shows up mad about something. What did you do to make the Horde? Oh, right, you're genocidal maniacs. Gotcha. The Scarlet Monastery one is like, you think at first, what? Oh, right, they're right there, right next to the Undercity. Yeah, of course you guys did that one. So it's one of those things where you have to remember, oh, right, they're not just two colors on a map. They're actually people living in these areas. And the Scarlet Monastery would have been killing a whole lot of undead. So yeah, it would make sense that Sylvanas would primarily be the one to go up against her. And she does have allies. You know what I mean? Like, it shows you that the alliances between Horde and Alliance groups are fueling a lot of this. That's the only real thing I can take away from this is when you look at who took what, think about why each group would be involved in that.
Yeah, and I think that's really the important takeaway from it. Some of them make a little bit of sense, like at least with like the Battle for Azeroth stuff. The Horde going to the Temple of Sethralis makes a lot of sense. The Horde are used to desert conditions. Half of the group that work with them, outside of like goblins, you have your Tauran nomads who are used to the plains, or used to the dry, sort of arid plains. Orcs decided to live literally in a desert and try to cultivate it. Like all of the races on the Horde side, all of they're like used to these conditions. So it's like, cool, Alliance is going to go take care of that. there's this temple in the sand. We know how to deal with sand and heat. We're going to go that way. It does make a little bit of sense. But hopefully that answers your question. We're going to move along to our next one, which comes from Seabread. Anyone notice that Surik Tak looks like a Cathraxi? Are the Nerubians descended from them, kind of like how it happened in Draenor? For those of you at home, Surik the Sundered is essentially a powered up evolution of what the Nerubians are here. He does look very much like a Cathraxi, but maybe a little more cockroachish in origin than a Cathraxi. But I talked a lot before, and I'll see if Matt has any opinions on it. Nerubians being descended from Cathraxi could make sense, but I don't know if we know truly the origin of Cathraxi aside from Olga creations, do we?
Yeah, which is all we know about Nerubians for that matter. What I think is interesting is that in the lead up to, I don't know how to describe it. There's like a movie that you get to watch while you're in the middle of doing all this stuff in the Nerubian areas, and it's about how the previous queen, like literally during the war between the Titans and the old gods, she turned on the old gods.
Yeah, she said, "No, I'm not doing this.
I'm not helping you. I don't. Me and my people are free." And I think that was fascinating because it implies that for some period of time in the Black Empire, there were species forming their own nations, forming their own identity. And that since the old gods are so chaotic and so much about, the thousand truths and everything is true. What's the old line? Everything is true, nothing is forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
Or nothing is true, everything is permitted. Those are the two variations I've heard. There's this idea that the Black Empire wasn't as simple as just thousands of years of craziness with the old gods in charge of everything. It was more like the old gods would come and kill you if you did something to make them angry, but otherwise they kind of left their own creations to their own devices. And at least some of them came up with their own societies. The Mantid clearly had their own society.
Well, they served Yasharaj, and then when Yasharaj was gone, they definitely built their own society.
Yeah, and so apparently did the Nerubians. At least these Nerubians did. We don't know about the Nerubians to the north, but we've seen that the Nerubians to the north very much did not like anything old god related. Like when the Forgotten One popped up, Anubarak was like, "Oh, guys, that's bad. Arthas, that thing's really bad. We should not go near it." And Arthas was like, "How about I kill it?" And he's like, "I don't think that's a good." And he went and killed it. Idea? That worked? I didn't think you could do that. So I think that what we're seeing is that the creations of the old gods are not necessarily mindless and obedient to the old gods. The other thing we see, like for another example of old god followers that we've seen and descendants of their creations, the Silithid are practically animalistic. We don't know anything. We have not yet to see a Silithid that has anything that even remotely approaches.
Well, no, that's not necessarily.
There's a big difference between the Karaji and the Silithid.
Oh, because I was going to say the Karaji are present in AQ, but there does seem to be a hierarchical structure at the very least.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing as thinking. We can't say right now that we know that the Silithid are an intelligent species, but we do know that they are related to or descended from the Karaji. And we know that the Karaji, much like the Nerubians, much like the Mantid, had intellect. And when we see them in Ankaraj, they still have minds. Their generals can think and talk and mock you. They can even kill you. They can kill somebody to inflict emotional wounds on somebody else. Like to the point where Fandral Staghelm sees his son die and breaks. And that's on purpose. Is it Vizax? I don't remember which one it is, but that's on purpose. They killed him to send a message to break his father. So it seems to me like there's this understanding of the Black Empire that is influenced, but is a good word, influenced by how the Titans view them and how the Titan Forged view them. That is not necessarily completely accurate.
Yeah.
Not only do the Nerubians seem to be able to develop their own culture and reject the old gods, but it's quite possible that Azeroth sees Nerubians as hers, Because if the old gods the old gods can't really make anything.
No, they pervert, they warp.
It's quite possible that everything we see as an old god creation, including the Chithraxi, including the squid-faced ones, including the Nerubians and the Akir and which were the other ones? The Akir and the Narok, the Narok, the ones that are the base tentacle-faced ones. All of them might be changed versions of things that were already on the planet. Like, isn't it weird that the queen of the Nerubians and her daughter both have facial features?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's possible that what we're looking at here is kind of the inverse of the Well of Eternity effect. The Well of Eternity makes things kind of uplift in a way. It changes them. If you look at the fish guys, and I'm forgetting their name and I feel like horrible, but we saw them in
Jinyu?
In Mr. Pandaria. Yes, the Jinyu. You look at the Jinyu, you look at night elves. What do they look like? They have a very similar body plan. You look at, now go to on Karaj, the Karaji emperors have the same body plan.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know that the Karaji emperors weren't like night elves or trolls or something that got turned into this. We don't know if any of the things, like we talk about, these things were born from the flesh of the old gods, but we don't know if the old gods literally made them out of themselves. And for that matter, the old gods' bodies could have just been made out of Azeroth.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, there's a strong indication that they were, right? Like, yeah. In this, I swear we'll get back to the root of the question. This is all related. The old gods being bits of void flung into our reality, burrowing deep into the core of Azeroth and corrupting what was around it, because that's what it did. They even look at the black blood itself. It appears to be ostensibly void incarnate, right? It is pure distilled liquid void. That's what it is. Go and look at the ceiling in Ankat. Go take a look at that and fly around there and tell me that it doesn't look like the ceiling is made out of liquid void. And that's what the black blood is, and that's what they're using here. So it's just corrupting what's already made of flesh. The theory about evolution involving anything that's void related is, I don't want to say suspect at best, but I don't know another way to put it.
I think a really good way to put it is that since the void has that idea of everything and nothing to it, when exposed to the void, any possible permutation could happen. And therefore, stuff that seems completely unreasonable could happen, because very unlikely things can happen now.
Mm-hmm.
It messes up probability. The chances of this thing turning into this thing are extremely small. But now all bets are off. That seems to be the way it goes.
With the exception of, in this particular case, Xalatath is able to apparently control and shape the evolution.
We don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it yet.
I think we're in the last 10 minutes of the episode, so I think we're gonna put a spoiler warning in here.
Okay.
So if you've joined us so far, thank you very much. We appreciate it. You know how to get a hold of us, but now we're going to talk about a thing. So do you want to go into it?
Basically, one of the things you find as you're going through is what the fate of the previous queen was. She wasn't killed. Her daughter had her taken, and they made her the first descendant, the first one to go through the ascendant process. The ascendant
perfect process at this point, mind you.
Oh, I don't think it's perfect even now. I don't think that there's any way you could argue that it was
more controlled at this point. But yeah,
one thing that happened, they make her the first ascendant. When you're doing the quest, you see this monstrosity, this enormous, powerful, and if you've seen a Chithraxi, not entirely dissimilar, but certainly not as much as you would say Surektak was. And she's just this behemoth that yet still has enough of her mind to beg you for death. She doesn't want to be saved. She doesn't want to be brought back to her people, because she's this enormous, mutated, monstrous thing now, and she just wants to die. And you don't kill her, because Anduin's there, and you know full well he's gonna give you a puppy dog look if you do. So you don't kill her, but she's like, "Oh, please kill me!" And like, and apparently my friend here thinks they can save you. Okay. Good luck with that. Thumbs up. So yeah, the process, the queen does not look very much like she used to. Let's put it that way. And yeah, it feels very much like the void process is being used, and this was them basically going, we have no idea what's going to happen, but we're going to do it anyway so we can see what happens, and that'll guide us for the next one.
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing that I got it from, because that's why they were like, as you're questing through there, it's telling you, right? It's telling you, hey, they're taking citizens, they're disappearing in the night. And they're either dissidents or folks that haven't exactly pledged loyalty, because they're promising the ones that are fanatically loyal, they're promising them ascension, they're promising them a reshaping, and there is a level of that going on. And this whole process is about that ascension. So you see these big hulking brutes, you see Surak Tak, you see the Queen, you see others of this that are not Cathraxi. They're I'm just going to call them mutants. They're mutated or forced evolutioned, void soaked or whatever Nerubians. That are moving through, like Matt said, this process of, if we give it this much and do this, this happens. If we do this much and do this, this happens. To the point where you start talking to others about how this ascension process works, and you start digging into it, and like, it is like dark magic. It is a ritual. It's not just showing the black blood or injecting the black blood or exposing to the black blood. There are deep arcane things being done here. Even if you look at Xal'atath is covered in arcane runes, something that the body did not have originally. And she's wielding as much arcane power as she is the void and the black blood itself, combining all these into her. Go ahead.
She even seems to be actually going to places of arcane power deliberately to steal it. And if you look at I went and looked to make sure of it. If you look at the model for the first Ascendant, what she looks like is very, very similar to a faceless one.
Yeah.
Like, she looks like a giant angry version of a faceless one. And it makes me wonder if what's happening with this process is that it is essentially finding the old god, for lack of a better word, the old god creation code that they use to make these things or make things into these things, and reactivating it randomly. Like, just hitting buttons. Okay, ooh, she's a big monster. That's interesting. It's like they're trying to use the void to reboot these creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you're getting things that look like enormous versions of various. For all we know, that's all a Cathraxi is. We don't know what Cathraxis are created from.
But I mean, the assumption
might have been made in a similar process. And maybe that's what Xal'atath's trying to discover. And maybe Surak Tak is a really close to successful version of that.
That's kind of what I was getting at a little bit too, because going back to how the old gods landed on the planet, how they got to Azeroth in the first place, it's their blood that is always the corrupting factor, right? Look at Yogg Saron. Look at Serenite, right? That's blood. Yeah, that's his blood.
And Olgax the Devourer is another one like this.
Yeah.
They're called Nerubian Hulks, by the way, in the game, I guess. And they're apparently created during the refinement of the Ascension process. This is also seems to be what the first Ascendant is kind of heading towards.
Well,
and that's...
I don't know if that's necessarily the end game, though, because...
No. I just mean that when you start with the first Ascendant, the next results seem to be these monsters. And then you get the ones that are wandering around the city. Like, there's Ascendants who are much closer to a humanoid Nerubian. In fact, they're more humanoid than most Nerubians.
And then you start looking at, I was going to say, if you look at the actual successful Ascendants, right? What are they? They look like a further refinement of the Karaji four-legged like beings, right? Except instead of having 4 legs and 4 arms, they're bipedal now. They're sleek. They're agile. They have their mental faculties.
They're similar to the kings, the emperors of the
The Twin
Karaji.
Emperors, exactly.
Yeah, Karaji Twin Emperors. And here's the thing that I'm going to bring up because I wanted to for a long time and I never have. We know that the Well of Eternity was created when a old god was ripped out of Azeroth. It's possible
or at least a part of it.
Yeah. Think about for a second, it might not be the blood of the Titan soul that is causing the changes to things that are exposed to it.
Well,
It might be the blood of the old god.
Or it might be
out of it.
Or it might be the combination of both.
Yeah.
Because what did we learn about Azerite?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Think about what that also means, that we've seen Saronite. We've now seen this, black blood that seems very likely to be from Y'Shaaj. Think about what this is saying about our understanding of how the old gods have affected Azeroth.
Well, I also want to point this out just from a color theory perspective, because I think this is wild, and I can already hear Taliesin and Devatal probably keying off on this at some point, so you're welcome. What happens when you combine an orange-red, like the blood of Azeroth, like Azerite, because that's what it is, with black? So those two colors together come out to a bluish-green. That's how it works in the color theory. What is the Well of Eternity, if not, when we go and see it, a bluish-green font of energy? Just throwing that out there. Not saying that that's...
They're doing a reference to the dress. Is this white and gold, or is it black and blue?
But it's just something I've been thinking about, because like the color theory stuff, I know that it doesn't necessarily apply, but it just seemed way too relevant, and I've been thinking about this since we got to Azj-Kahet, and just seeing all the different variations of the black blood, which has like a deep, it's almost not black, it's like it had a deep purplish hue to it, so it's got that blue, that blue undertone that you can really brighten up and make that sort of yellow and blue makes that like turquoise green type thing. I paint miniatures. This is where my brain goes. I'm sorry, folks. But we're going to find out, because even at the end of the current tier, and again, spoilers, there's a cinematic that plays with the downfall of the current queen and Xal'atath essentially coming back as we have defeated her. There's like time freezes or something. We don't get to take a shot at Xal'atath. But she talks with the queen, and the queen is like, what have you done? You promised. And then before she can say anything, Xal'atath says, I promised nothing, yet gave you everything. You were a means to an end. You were a stepping stone. You gave me what I needed. I just wish you would have been a little more sturdy of a plaything to last a little bit longer. And then she pops off to Voidland and does whatever she's going to do next. But I think that's really interesting, because to Matt's earlier point, Surak-Tak and the First Ascended and all of these monstrosities or evolutions that are being essentially wrought upon the Nerubians, well, yeah, like clearly that's part of her plan. She wants to do something with it. She's interested in transforming something. Is she interested in transforming herself? Is she interested in transforming Azeroth? We don't know, but it is part of a much, much larger plan. And to Matt's earlier point, she definitely does seem to be going to places with heavy arcane influences, but also places of deep shadow, such as Shadowfall, in particular, looking at Beledar, right? Like, we see her trying to drain that power from it. We also, interestingly enough, and I just now I'm thinking about this, in the last expansion, when we go back in time, the black disc that she has, that Iridikron had, that I guess he gave to her because she was the one wielding it here, had the corrupted essence of Galakrond in it. Now that's shattered. I would have expected that to be a little more, I don't know, climatic if it had that much energy in it, which makes me think that it wasn't just storing energy, it was a vessel to bring it from point A to point B. Possibly.
The other possibility might be that she wasn't trying to take power from Beledar.
True. She may have just been trying to manipulate it or move it.
No. She may have been putting power into Beledar.
Oh? Yeah,
remember,
interesting.
What Beledar is doing looks an awful lot like the Naru process of going from light to darkness, right? And Beledar had been light the whole time until the sudden Sargeras attempt to stab the planet. And then Beledar began shifting phases, which is something that Naru do when they're dying.
And also don't forget that the black blood was inert until that moment too with Sargeras.
Yeah, and what happens when you push the balance further, and suddenly it's got more dark phases than light phases. We've seen it before. It's a Void Lord.
Yeah.
And what do we often hear described as the Void Lords? The guys who sent the old gods into Azeroth and other worlds. So it's quite possible that she's basically trying to do an end run around the old gods. Like, they're not around. There's no old gods. So who do we talk to? Who gets to be in charge?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
She's trying to turn Bellatar into something else.
We will find out, though, but there is definitely a theme of transformation here. Regardless, it's a matter of, at this point, I think, figuring out what the true target is or what the end game is, which, honestly, we might not even find out until midnight. This might be something that winds up leading into there, because it does feel like we're going to be spending this expansion sort of chasing after her. So, but I think that's going to do it for us, friends. Thank you very much for joining us today. Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to our podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast with the queue, and an ads-free site experience. We do have several shows upcoming. We're going to be releasing them in a slow series of succession. I'm currently in the process of editing one of our live play one-shots that Liz expertly ran, Murder on the Eberron Express. I don't know when those will release, but please watch the feeds for those. And then if you have questions for us, or if you want us to do something in particular, you can send that in. You can hit us up on Discord if you're a Patreon subscriber. You can go to that Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel. We tend to look there first as an extra way of saying thank you. And if you don't support us on Patreon, we understand completely. Listening to us on things like Spotify do help immensely. But you can also submit your questions or topics or anything you want to send our way on our Q and Podcast Questions channel, or send us an email at podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Just specify the show that it is for and let us know any special pronunciation of your name. With that, folks, we'll see you next week.